In recent years, facial reconstructions have moved beyond museums and into public consciousness. We see them in textbooks, on television, and across news articles. But increasingly, some of these reconstructions are being used for more than education or scientific insight. They are being weaponized to push modern political ideologies. In the UK, school library materials and mainstream media sources have been promoting claims that the earliest Britons were black, or that Britain's ancient heritage was inherently multicultural. One example is the children's book titled Brilliant Black British History, written by Nigerian-born author Atinuke, which is stocked in UK school libraries. The book, which is promoted by the Book Trust, states, quote, "The first humans in Britain were black. About 6,000 years ago, people with brown skin brought farming and built Stonehenge," end quote. It's important to note that in modern Western usage, the term black is typically used to refer to people of sub-Saharan African descent. The Mesolithic and Neolithic populations in Britain, however, were not sub-Saharan African, neither genetically or culturally. Applying the term black to them therefore projects modern racial categories onto ancient populations where they do not belong, a practice which anthropologists refer to as mirroring, which introduces confusion and can foster a politicised reinterpretation of prehistory. A striking example of this is the 2018 facial reconstruction of Cheddar Man, a 10,000-year-old Mesolithic skeleton. The image, widely circulated by the UK media and displayed in the Natural History Museum, describes him as having dark to black skin and blue eyes based on probabilistic DNA modelling. The image spread across the press, classrooms and exhibitions, with the implication that Britain was always diverse in the modern racial sense. But this kind of messaging is not neutral. It reflects a dangerous trend in how the past is presented to us, a practice which anthropologists call mirroring. As Julia Class explains in her paper on facial reconstruction, quote, "Mirroring is when a person sees themselves in another person without acknowledging that the other person lived a different life in a different culture. It can lead to cultural appropriation and large biased misinterpretations of the past," end quote. And this is exactly what we're seeing with Cheddar Man. Facial reconstruction starts with a skull. Layer by layer, clay or digital muslin skin is added to form the human face. But the process often involves a great deal of artistic interpretation. As anthropologist Julia Class explains, quoting forensic artist Caroline Wilkinson, quote, "Facial reconstructions require some artistic interpretation and best guesses when it comes to how someone looked," end quote. Surprisingly, this kind of reconstruction isn't always about scientific accuracy either. In anthropology, the primary goal is often empathy. These reconstructions are meant to help modern people connect with individuals from the distant past. As Class puts it, citing the work of bioarchaeologist Bonnie Boutin, quote, "Anthropologists use both facial reconstructions and osteonarratives to bring to life people from the past so that the public can empathise with them," end quote. However, when the aim shifts too far towards empathy, there's a real risk that people may begin to lose sight of where scientific evidence ends and where artistic imagination begins, which in turn can open the door to serious misrepresentation. A good example of this is the reconstruction of the so-called Mycenaean girl. Her skull was missing nearly all of the facial bones, with one study describing the skull as, quote, displaying a gaping chasm where the facial bones once were, end quote. And yet, a full lifelike face was still presented to the public. As Class puts it, quote, there are valid ethical concerns. Some imagination is used to fill in the gaps. Sometimes this is seen as misleading and disrespectful to those who died and to their descendants, end quote. Facial reconstructions are commonly used in forensics, where accuracy is crucial. But in archaeology, according to Class, the bar is lower. Quote, while anthropologists should seek to create reconstructions that are as accurate as possible, the end goal does not require the same kind of complete accuracy as forensic reconstructions do, end quote. These reconstructions serve as stories, osteonarratives designed to generate empathy, not certainty. But empathy, when left unchecked, can turn into projection, and that's where mirroring becomes a problem. When viewers see a reconstructed face and feel a deep emotional connection, it can be powerful. But it can also be misleading. Class warns, quote, people sometimes use the past as a mirror instead. They see themselves in the past and ignore the important cultural differences and struggles these people went through, end quote. This becomes especially dangerous when reconstructions are used to validate modern identities or political arguments. As Class says, quote, politicians have been known to use the presence or absence of certain identities in past cultures as evidence for the validity or invalidity of that identity in present-day societies, end quote. In cases like this, then, what we're being presented with isn't always actual history at all, but is politics masquerading as archaeology. Nowhere is this issue clearer than with Cheddar Man and the media-driven claim that black people built Stonehenge. In 2018, a team of scientists reconstructed the face of this 10,000-year-old skeleton using ancient DNA. Across UK media, headlines proclaimed that the first Briton was black. The government-backed display at the Natural History Museum helped reinforce this popular interpretation. But one of the geneticists involved, Dr. Susan Walsh, later clarified, quote, it's not a simple statement of this person was dark-skinned. It is his most probable profile based on current research, end quote. And there does seem to be several issues with the current research this profile is based on. The model used to predict Cheddar Man's pigmentation relied on 36 genetic markers or SNPs, which are small points of DNA variation associated with skin, hair and eye colour. These markers were drawn from a reference dataset of 2,025 modern individuals, primarily from Europe and the United States, with limited representation from Africa and Asia. While technically global, the dataset was overwhelmingly Western in composition. For example, 1,159 of the 2,025 samples came from Poland alone, while only 75 came from Africa and Papua New Guinea combined, all of whom were categorised as dark black. This imbalance extended to predicted skin tones as well, with 130 falling into very pale, 886 falling into pale, 846 falling into intermediate, 59 into dark, and 104 into dark black. So in total, 1,862 samples were classified as either very pale, pale, or intermediate, whereas only 163 fell into the dark or dark black categories, accounting for just over 8% of the dataset. Even the intermediate category, often interpreted as a neutral or median phenotype, was dominated by Polish individuals who made up 582 of the 846 intermediate samples. This means that what the model calls intermediate skin tone is still largely Central European in character. Such a strong demographic and tonal skew raises serious questions about the objectivity of the model and its suitability for predicting pigmentation in ancient individuals, especially those who fall outside the genetic profile of the original sample base. The predictive model placed Cheddar Man in the darkest of 5 pigmentation categories, but that result came with significant uncertainty, as one of the lead scientists, Dr. Susan Walsh, later acknowledged. Walsh discussed how Cheddar Man's DNA had degraded over the course of 10,000 years, and even with genetic modelling, she stressed the limitations of the prediction, stating, quote, "We simply don't know his skin colour," end quote. A 2024 article in The Telegraph also echoed this uncertainty from Walsh. Quote, Susan Walsh clarified that Cheddar Man's appearance was uncertain, while a separate 2017 study from geneticist Sarah Tishkoff found that predicting likely pigmentation based on giveaway genes was inaccurate, end quote. The study cited here by The Telegraph was published in a scientific journal, where Tishkoff urged caution when using modern genetic markers to reconstruct ancient traits, precisely the approach taken in the model used for Cheddar Man. Tishkoff warned, quote, "Reconstructions of Mesolithic and Neolithic pigmentation phenotype using loci common in modern populations should be interpreted with some caution, as it is possible that other as yet unexamined loci may have also influenced phenotype," end quote. In addition to this, the journal also explains how such models often oversimplify complex traits. Quote, "These models predict pigmentation as a discrete trait. Rather than evaluating the accuracy of these models in predicting melanin index or another continuous value, most work to date has evaluated prediction accuracy in categories such as very pale, pale, intermediate, dark, and dark black skin colour. Dichotomization of quantitative measures is rarely defensible and is often misleading," end quote. Dichotomization in this case means placing skin colour into rigid categories instead of treating it as a sliding scale. This can produce misleading results, especially when applied to ancient populations that may not fit modern genetic patterns. In other words, the depiction of Cheddar Man as dark-skinned is highly speculative at best and is politically motivated at the worst. And yet, this interpretation was widely accepted by mainstream media and public commentators without serious scrutiny. More concerning still, it now appears in educational materials, including children's books found in school libraries. Facial reconstruction can be a powerful tool for building empathy with the past, but it's not a time machine, and it should never be mistaken for absolute truth. When interpretations based on partial data are amplified into political slogans, we cross a line from anthropology to propaganda. What begins as an effort to humanize ancient peoples too easily becomes an attempt to overwrite or erase the identities of living ones. The case of Cheddar Man is not merely an academic debate, it is a case study in how science can be misused when it serves an ideology over evidence. If we want to understand the past honestly, we must separate our modern reflections from ancient realities. We owe the dead more than just empathy, we owe them the truth. And we, the living, must have the integrity to keep the two apart.